Thank you very much. This takes us to other business then, the report from Principals Integrity. Councillor Parrish.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I would like to speak before anybody else, just so it doesn't look like I'm responding to whatever comes after this. I want to apologize for the only sentence in my whole career I've ever regretted stating. And it has been pointed out that I have had a pretty colorful career. I've been pretty outspoken, and I've said some pretty nasty things about our American neighbors and a few other things. I regret none of that. This one sentence I regret deeply. It's not how I think. It's not how I feel. Wake me up with a flashlight in the eye in the middle of the night. It is not me. Never has been, never will be. And I don't want to talk about the circumstances around how it was exposed, because that doesn't make it any better. I don't want to make excuses. I just want you to know it's pretty devastating to me, but I imagine it's more devastating to Deputy Chief Berkeley-Brown. I took a lot of time to read through her career, and it has not been easy. She's had a lot of bumps along the road. And what comes through is massive persistence and dedication. So to take her most wonderful moment and have my words spoil that is what I regret the most. Because those words are empty. They mean nothing because there's no substance behind them. But for them to affect her most joyous moment has made me very regretful. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Councillor Sato.
Thank you. Wow. It's a hard one to follow, but I do have questions about the report. And I guess my concern, I was very concerned about the comments. Councillor Parrish has commented on what she said. But I'm also extremely concerned that the deputy was put into a position of having these comments made public by the Police Services Board, and in particular the chair of the board. I think that was absolutely a horrible thing to do to someone. I'm very concerned with the report. We're here today dealing with the report that you've given, and we have one side of a conversation. And I was commenting this morning to Councillor Cook. He made a comment to me, and I said, if I took your comment out of context, it would sound pretty bad, without having my response to him and his further response. I think that is a deplorable way of dealing with something of this magnitude. I think it is absolutely deplorable that it was made public. I think it should have been dealt with, absolutely. But it should not have been dealt with in such a way that caused embarrassment to an officer of Peel Regional Police. I'm absolutely appalled that that happened, and that half a story was given and half a story was used. Half of a conversation, that assumptions were made, that if I looked at some of the assumptions that are here, I might have assumed a different side of the conversation. So I think I mentioned earlier in the other report that assumptions can come back and bite you in the butt. The conversation, as my understanding from reading Councillor Parrish's lawyer's report, is that this conversation was not privy to freedom of information discussion at all, and we have a written statement attesting to that from the city's lawyer that we received. All members of council know that if it's on a private phone, it does not belong to the municipality and it should not be shared. It's private, confidential conversation. Obviously that means nothing, and that really bothers me. That really bothers me that a member of this council would share private conversation publicly and embarrass a member of our wonderful police force publicly. And I'm afraid that when I read the report, my reading of the report was tainted by that, absolutely tainted by it. There's information in the report, there's statements that are not accurate, that Peel Regional Police are not employees of the Region of Peel. They do not report to the Region of Peel, and I have that also in writing from David Schwark. They are not employees. So assuming that the comments relating to employees in the Code of Conduct apply, that's erroneous. And so when I read that and I read assumptions and I see half of a conversation and I question the report. I absolutely question the report. I don't question the fact that Councillor Parrish said words that she should not have said. She absolutely should not have, and she has acknowledged that. But what I'm reading in front of me is, I guess I'm baffled. I mean, we know it's very clear that you can't trust having private conversations that are supposed to be confidential. And I feel very bad for our police officers who can't trust that something that is said is not going to be made public. I absolutely find that deplorable. And the inference in here that someone on the Police Services Board leaked information is extremely worrisome as well. And I don't see that questioned at all. I could make inferences as to who leaked the information, but I'm not. But I really have concern with some of your conclusions. I really do, because I don't have both sides of the story. I understand that the comments on their own need dealing with. But you don't bring a report like this without having the full story. You need, I assume that Councillor McFadden gave you both sides of the conversation, because otherwise that's, I don't think our police would take something to court with having one side of a conversation taken out of context. So that is my concern. That is my concern with the report. I'm going to move receipt of the report. If you can bring back the full conversation, the full context of that conversation, then I might be prepared to look at it further. But I shook my head when I read it. And I read Councillor Parrish's lawyer's statement, and I read her affidavit as well. And I listened to her. I don't always agree with Councillor Parrish, and we have butted heads many, many times. So I'm not sitting here today defending what she said. But I'm just appalled by the report, and I'm appalled at the behavior of the Police Services Board and a member of our council. I think it was, I'd question why. I would really question why only one side of a conversation was used and was reported. And it's extremely suspicious that the rest of the conversation was not here in front of us.
Wow.
Did you would like to respond to that, please?
Actually, is this on? Thank you. I had a few comments that I thought would be helpful.
Okay.
I will not assume that everybody has read the report in detail, so I would like to make a few comments just with respect to the report, and then I will respond to Councillor Sato's comments to the best of my ability. So we were appointed, as everybody knows, in January of 2018, and one of certainly the overarching objectives in having an integrity commissioner is trying to ensure a robust an effective policy and procedure to enhance the public's perception that council conducts itself and meets ethical standards, and where those standards are not met, that there is a mechanism for review. In February of this year, Councillor Parrish sent to Councillor McFadden, in her capacity as chair of the Police Services Board, text messages relating to and disparaging of the superintendent's abilities, and in doing so made disparaging remarks about not only the individual, but also regarding the police promotional process. Those remarks called into question the role of race in the board's promotion practices. The texts in question are set out in the report, verbatim. And the information conveyed, even though in the form of text messages, does constitute a business communication. And Councillor McFadden, in her capacity as Police Services Board Chair, and being in the midst of a promotion process, brought the messages to the attention of the board. Coming in the midst of a promotion in which the superintendent, who is now the deputy chief, was central, the Police Services Board was deeply disturbed by the messages and filed a complaint. Thus, the text messages became the subject matter of the investigation. The texts were sent, the recipient was alarmed, the board was informed, the board was alarmed, and the complaint was filed. Our role in providing an investigation to you is to bring you, following a fair process, a recommendation report, which you have before you. We received the complaint on April 6th. I will not repeat the complaint, but it is contained in the body of the report before you. We conducted a fair and balanced investigation and included interviews of the complaint board, of the respondent, Councillor Parrish, and of other relevant witnesses, and a review of the Peel Code of Conduct and other relevant policies and legislation. We provided the information necessary to Councillor Parrish in order that she could meaningfully respond. She may have wanted more information, but it was not possible to provide her more, either because of our process, which met standards of procedural fairness, or because we did not have it to give. We did not, for example, have any of the responding text messages, which may or may not have been sent from Councillor McFadden back to Councillor Parrish. Neither councillor could provide them, nor could the service provider. Nevertheless, there was sufficient information upon which to conclude that the words that appeared in the texts were Councillor Parrish's words and were capable of plain language interpretation. The Peel Code of Conduct provides its stated purpose as promoting high standards of ethical conduct of the chair and members of council. In particular, the Code of Conduct requires that members conduct themselves with decorum, demonstrating respect towards colleagues and staff. As noted in the Code of Conduct, the Ontario Human Rights Code also applies to members of council. The Human Rights Code provides that every person has the right to be free from racial discrimination in a place of employment. In accordance with the principles of procedural fairness, on May 29th, we provided Councillor Parrish with our preliminary findings report and invited her to provide response by June 6th, which was eventually extended to June 26th. We received 2 submissions from the councillor's lawyer, the first expressing preliminary concerns and seeking additional information, the second providing substantive response. The letter that was circulated with Councillor Parrish's letter accompanying our report on this agenda today was sent to us as a result of the preliminary findings report. This has not been an easy investigation, but the process of providing preliminary findings to the respondent and seeking comments in response while not required, is a helpful part of the process in preparing the final report. In this instance, it clarified that certain findings in our report were being read with emphasis which was not intended. In particular, we did not intend to conclude with certainty that Councillor Parrish was aware of the promotion process. In addition, some phraseology was being read as inflammatory, which too was not intended. We revisited our report, and what you have before you is our final report. As a result of our investigation, and regardless of whether Councillor Parrish knew that there was a promotional process underway, we find that the statements in the text messages discredit and disparage the Deputy Chief, her character, her ability, and suggest that her promotion was based on race and gender rather than ability, experience, and character. This applies whether you read the word promotion in the text as referencing her promotion to Superintendent or any pending promotion to Deputy Chief. Whether the Police Services Board thought Councillor Parrish somehow had become aware of the promotion process does not change the essence of the comment. The message in the text is clear. And notwithstanding that we hear today Councillor Parrish's heartfelt apology and acknowledge that, we do find in the report that the text messages do impugn the hiring and promotion practices of the Police Services Board, who is the complainant, and that the statements do constitute discrimination under the Ontario Human Rights Code, and that the statements breach the Peel Code of Conduct. And we know that there are those who will say it's only a text message. It's nothing. It could have been worse. Indeed, it could have been worse. It could have been a tweet. That would have been worse. But the words in the text messages are not nothing. The words of the text message are offensive. And there are those who will say the texts were a private comment. They were not intended to be shared, but they were shared. And texts are a way of communicating, and they are a business record. They may feel more casual in today's technological era, but they are just as relevant as email. And these comments are unacceptable, particularly coming from an elected official. We understand that the words were uttered when Councillor Parrish was upset, following what she perceived as shortcomings in performance at a community meeting. However, the messages forming part of the business record of conversation between council colleagues and pertaining to employee performance issues, ostensibly to the board's own promotional process, were perceived by the board as a matter serious enough to warrant action, and we agree. Members of council must recognize that words matter. The community, the public at large, look to their elected representatives not only for leadership and wisdom, but for integrity, respect, and compassion. We are of the view that the offensive text messages were so unacceptable that regardless of the motive or intention, a penalty is warranted to clearly send the message that such behavior falls below the standard expected of elected officials. Recognizing the principles of progressive discipline, which are applied when employees are sanctioned for violating policies in the course of their employment, we feel it appropriate that a nominal penalty be imposed for this violation. A monetary penalty, although not remedial, can have a salutary effect and serve as a deterrent. In this regard, we would admonish the councillor to be more mindful of blunt and intemperate comments. In this case, we recommend council impose a 5-day suspension of pay. More importantly, we believe that this investigation highlights the need for a greater understanding on the part of Councillor Parrish and perhaps other councillors of the region that if ever it was in some circles tolerable, it is no longer acceptable to even casually undermine the accomplishments of persons on the basis of their color, sex, or other prohibited grounds. We recommend that, much as Starbucks has done in response to a single incident, as a preventative measure, Peel Regional Council should engage a qualified person to provide sensitivity training, which includes, at a minimum, exploration of sex and race-based biases. Finally, we wish to publicly thank everyone who asked to participate in our investigation, who was asked to participate, and express our genuine appreciation for the sharing of time, knowledge, and opinions by everyone concerned. Councillor Sato, I'm not sure whether that answered the questions that you had put to us, and if not, I'm happy to.
Sorry, I guess they were more comments than questions, but the first question was, why would you not require both sides of the conversation?
As we have explained in the report, neither the complainant, neither Councillor McFadden, who's chair of the Police Services Board, lodged the complaint. But neither Councillor McFadden, who was the recipient of the text messages, nor Councillor Parrish, who was the sender of the text messages, had, as they advised us, retained copies of any of the surrounding texts, whatever they may have been, and our attempts to obtain those through both Councillor McFadden and Councillor Parrish and back through the service provider were not successful. They are not retained by the service provider. So we were not able to obtain any. We did not see that that created an impediment to proceeding with the investigation on the strength of not having some surrounding texts, the contents of which we were not made aware in any case. We certainly did not feel that this was a matter to preclude conducting the investigation that the complainant had quite legitimately lodged.
Okay. With regard to your comment 55, it has been suggested that text messages were confidential. We note the text sent between councillors are subject to retention. We have a legal statement from the City of Mississauga lawyer that states the exact opposite, that unless the messages are on city equipment paid for by the city, they are not the property of the municipality. They cannot be subpoenaed for or requested and provided through freedom of information, and that actually sharing the text is a violation of the Code of Conduct of the City of Mississauga. We had a situation where this occurred several years ago with the previous Integrity Commissioner who was investigating when a member of council shared a confidential internal email, and no one owned up to sharing that with the media. And it was explained to us at that time through freedom of information by Mary Ellen Bench, our lawyer, and all members of council have the memo that she sent that states that that information, those confidential texts that are personal, that are not in the property of the city, are not liable for that. So I'm questioning your statement here. The other statement is, I'm not sure why. I realize that it doesn't impact your comments, but the statement that Peel Regional Police are Region of Peel employees, while they are not. So the policies and statements that you've applied based on that are not accurate, and it's concerns like this that raises concerns with the report itself. But I am mostly concerned, I am extremely concerned that both sides of this conversation were not shared. I find that appalling that anyone would share one half of a conversation. And I fully understand that the comments were made. The comments were absolutely terrible. They were appalling comments that the councillor made. But I'm talking about the process here.
So, if I may, let me just respond, I think, first to the comment with respect to the legal advice that you have from your city solicitor, and I have absolutely no doubt that that advice is perfectly accurate with respect to the issue that it pertains to. This is not a situation where somebody has sought through Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy legislation access to texts between two councillors. Let me give the analogy, for example, if a council member were to send a text to a constituent, and that constituent were to go to another body, not necessarily an agency of the Region of Peel, such as Police Services Board, but perhaps to the media and say, look at this text that I obtained. I think it would be cold comfort to a councillor to say, I have a legal opinion from my city solicitor that says that those are not FOIable. So the issue for this complaint, councillor, is not with respect to whether those texts would be FOIable. The issue is that the texts were the subject matter of a complaint from the Police Services Board to the Integrity Commissioner, and we conducted the investigation on that basis.
Councillor Miles.
Excuse me, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do believe that this council adopted a code of conduct for a reason, and we also hired an integrity commissioner to do the investigation, be impartial, and provide council with a fair and unbiased recommendation in regards to whatever complaint they receive. I think the Integrity Commissioner's report, and I think even more so the explanation that we have received today from the Integrity Commissioner, shows that they gave careful consideration to the whole matter at hand with the information that they were provided. I think in light of Councillor Parrish's comments, in addition to the remorse she feels about this particular incident, she has not said that that she didn't say the words that are subject of this complaint. I would move the recommendation in the report from the Integrity Commissioner. I know Councillor Sato has put on a motion for receipt, but if that comes first, Mr. Chairman, I would
take that motion first. I need a seconder, though.
Okay, you can take that first, but then I would put on the motion with the recommendation that is in the report. I really don't believe council can take this matter lightly. I'll leave it at that. I think enough has been said. But I would need a seconder for putting the recommendation forward.
On the receipt motion, Councillor Cook has seconded it, so, but you'll need a seconder if that fails.
Is anyone willing to second my motion to move the recommendation of the Integrity Commissioner? That's been moved. Good. Thank you.
So Raz would second that. Councillor Unica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very brief, but I do think it requires a few words. First of all, let me say I'm very grateful that Councillor Parrish has apologized unequivocally, and I think that's very, very important, especially in the manner in which she's couched it for a career that she regrets nothing else to regret this. I think that sets it in a very good light. And as I told her the night after it happened, because I called her, I said, it is not in keeping with the person that I've known for 30 years. And I can say that about Carolyn. That having been said, I'm a little bit concerned of how it's progressed, in that the fact of the matter remains is that it happened. And you can't pretend that it didn't happen. So once it was transmitted, I'm not sure if I'm a contrarian, but I think you put a lot of people in an untenable position when they've got to make a decision on whether, well, if it happened, it didn't happen, it's a matter of record in writing, how do I deal with it? I think the choice that they have, and to argue process, I would argue materiality instead. What actually happened? You know, the thought that I have with regards to all of it, as uncomfortable as it is, it's the inquiry on Indigenous individuals and what's happened there. What an uncomfortable discussion. But we're better off for having had the discussion. So if we had to make an error, I'm glad we made the error we did. It was on behalf of transparency. I think that matters to us. As difficult as this is, I'm glad we're having the conversation. I think we owe that to everybody involved. I've made mistakes before. Sometimes you think you want to sweep them, but you don't learn as much as saying, here's what I did, I apologize, I hope it's a teachable moment for all of us. And I think this has been a learning moment for all of us. The second point that I want to make, and this is probably the main reason why I rise, just as fate would have it, and I thank Mayor Crombie for this, she organized another one of those marvelous symposiums where the mayor calls in our young women future leaders, and there we were at Sea Cafe, and Elizabeth Dowdswell, and I'm going to forget her last name, the Lieutenant Governor, was the speaker. Marvelous. And as fate would have it, I was there, and I was with many of the young, soon-to-be leaders in our community, women in our community from my high school. And wouldn't you know it, Deputy Chief Ingrid Berkeley-Brown sits next to me. First time I had any time to deal with her and talk with her, and in 1 hour that I spent with her, what an amazing woman. What an ambassador for the force. What sophistication. What integrity. What class. Proud to think that after 30 years she made it through the ranks. I was proud of our chief and the process that brought her to this point. And if we covered this up, I wouldn't have the chance to stand up here and tell her that. If she was here, I'd look her in the eyes and say, I was there, I've seen into your eyes, I've heard who you are, and I'm proud of you, and you were undeserving of this. And so I think we have to stand up and say that. And that's why I think, difficult as it is, this is something we all learn from. I think we have to reaffirm our support of the chief and what she's done and the staff that we have. We have to reaffirm our support of Ingrid Berkeley-Brown, and that's what we're doing today. And far more important, Chief, you'll recall the last time you were here, as the old white guy in the room, what I said at the time was, I wish I understood more about this intersectionality. The folks in our communities that are more hard done by, and outcomes don't always go their way. Not unusual for women and women of color. And here's someone who's the poster child for it today. How is it that this woman ended up in these crosshairs? It's just not right. She's someone that's gone to work for 30 years, worked through the ranks under very difficult and challenging circumstances, and she got to this point and had to face challenges like this that I, as an old white guy of 30 years, would never have faced. And to me, that's the teachable moment in all of this. So it was unfortunate. I think the councillor's done the right thing and expressed her regret, and she did that to me privately as well. I think we have to accept the findings of the report. We've all learned from it. I think we all in unison have to tell Ingrid, we are proud of you and the level that you've achieved. I'm glad we assessed it, and we are and erred on the side of transparency. And I hope, as I have, I hope we've all learned something from this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cook.
Thank you. The report, the Commissioner's, the Integrity Commissioner's report I've read. I've also read the report from Councillor Sato's, or Councillor Parrish's council. And what strikes me immediately, and I think everybody here knows my background as a researcher. I'm an author. I've spent 25 years doing research for 4 books. And what bothers me about the Integrity Commissioner's report, in my text of research, it's incomplete.
I'll say.
I would like to see the complete text messages, because I can't take 2 lines out of a message and relate them as to how they relate to the whole picture without understanding the whole picture. When I write a book, when I write a story, if I were just to see 2 lines, I'd have to spend all my time trying to find out what led to those 2 lines and how they actually affect and interact with the rest of the story. And that is just not happening. And I point out in the report, or the report from the Councillors Council, that, and I'm going to quote, "Only retained and presented partial portions of the text messages, which oddly exclude her own responses." That's a comment that bothers me, because it's obvious that we don't have the complete messages. And then it goes on to say further down, "That conclusion is wholly at odds with the universality accepted principle, including by the Supreme Court of Canada, that all words should always be read in their entire context." That isn't happening here. So therefore, I can't support the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation. I think what we have to do is just move receipt. And I think we've all learned a great deal, and I'm quite sure that Councillor Parrish, and I've heard her comments, and I think she is feeling very bad about everything. And I think enough has been said today on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sprovieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been the target of several complaints in the last couple of years, and my council were very understanding of the situation and did not impose the penalties that were recommended to me. I want to say that I appreciate the Integrity Commissioner's report, and from a technical perspective, I believe that you brought us the proper recommendation here in what to do in this situation. But from a human perspective, understanding sometimes the emotions and the passion that we councillors have to deal with, and the situations that we deal with, I can understand why sometimes we say things that maybe are off the cuff and probably not correct, not proper, politically correct, whatever you want to call it. And I understand that these things happen. And I know Councillor Parrish. I know her reputation about how she stamped on George Bush's doll when the U.S. invaded Iraq. And I totally was, now we know that she was totally right in what she tried to, the message that she tried to portray to the world about what the U.S. did in the Middle East. So in this situation, and given that the councillor is, I think she understands that what she said was not proper, and she's made that clear in her statement. And also I have to say that I've known the Berkeley-Brown for a number of years. I've dealt with many issues in my ward when she was superintendent here in Division 21, and I've met with her on many issues, and I found her to be an excellent superintendent. She worked on all the issues, resolved many, but some of them were very difficult, of course, like brigand entries that happen regularly. But I haven't received any complaints from that area where it was happening. Obviously, the police. She made sure the police were there, had a presence, and are scaring away the people. So I have the greatest respect for Superintendent Brown, and I know that she did not deserve the words that were said. But as I said, sometimes in anger, words come out, and Councillor Parrish has apologized. She understands what she did, and I give her credit for that. It's not that she's standing here and saying, you know, I said the right thing, and I stand what I said. I stand by what I said, and that's not Councillor Parrish. I think Councillor Parrish has very high standards. I believe that she fights for the right things, And I believe that it was a slip of tongue in anger. It was just words of anger. She wanted to get something, and that was probably not reasonable, and out of frustration, those words came out. So I have to give her the benefit of the doubt, and knowing Councillor Parrish and her passion, and she's a passionate person. I know she is, just like, and I'm very similar to her passion, and I think that I think she needs a break. I think this is her first offense. I don't think she has ever gotten in trouble before. So everybody, not from the Integrity Commissioner anyway. So I believe everybody deserves a chance, a second chance. I think that given Councillor Parrish's reputation, I think she deserves a break. So I'm going to support receiving the report. But I also want to say to the Integrity Commissioners that I believe you, from a technical perspective, you did the right job. And we thank you for that. And keep doing it whenever things happen. Because this is what, when things are brought to the open, is when people sometimes realize their mistakes and learn from that. And I'm sure Councillor Parrish has learned a lot after all these years in politics. She's learned her lesson. So I'm just going to support the receipt of the report and not impose the penalty that's been recommended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly this is a really uncomfortable position. I think that all of us around this table are placed in. A lot of times when we're angry, we do say things that we shouldn't say, but that doesn't excuse the comments or towards the superintendent. And I heard Councillor Parrish's apology. She owned it. She apologized publicly. I believe that the apology was very sincere. And certainly it's a lesson. It's a lesson to all of us. I know comments have been made over the years. I mean, people, geez, they make comments on social media. And sometimes you wish you could take those words back, but owning up to those and owning up to what was said, I think is the right step. And certainly when you're in a heated debate and a heated discussion, sometimes you tend to say things that you don't really mean. So I guess one of the things that I'm a little disappointed with is how the whole thing unfolded, and I think that it would be incumbent on the councillor who received the text messages to really talk to the councillor who sent the messages and sort of figure this out before it moved to this step at the next stage. Because I don't think that the superintendent should be exposed to this, and I think that it probably could be something that would have been resolved among the parties. But anyway, it's here. And I've worked with Councillor Parrish for a number of years. I've never heard her utter a racist comment to me or said anything. The only thing that I do know is that she is an advocate for her community, and she respects her community, and she fights for her community. And again, sometimes you say things that you really don't mean. And I don't know the situation, so I'm not going to comment on that when it was said and that. But certainly I apologize. Also, I mean, I'd like the superintendent to know that, and the police, and Chief Evans and your entire staff, we have always supported you. You don't police Caledon, but I think we've always been very supportive of yourself and your officers and your superintendents and that. And so I will vote in favor of moving receipt, because I think that this is a lesson that all of us can learn from. None of us are perfect because we're all humans. And I do agree with Councillor Cook, is that the report is incomplete, because I too would have liked to see the other responses and the entire thread, and I hear what you said, and I heard what you said, that you weren't able to retrieve it, but I don't know how this would work in a court of law. I honestly don't know. But it would have been nice to see that. I've been one for a complaint filed to the Integrity Commissioner, and it was, anyway, it was unfounded, but I would have liked to have seen the entire conversation and not just bits and pieces of it. So thank you for the report, and thank you.
Councillor Starr.
Well, truly, this is probably one of the, excuse me, one of the most difficult topics and decisions, and just the whole discussion that we've ever had at this council. And I asked just previously to the meeting, have we ever had one like this? And I guess we haven't. And unfortunately, I think there should have been probably a little bit more information. I think we were driven by the fact we thought that maybe this was the last council meeting, and I think today we found that there's probably another one in September. I hope that wasn't the case. But what we have to do here is start a healing process. And the healing process basically is between the person that made the comments and our great police force. I mean, when Adrian spoke, I mean, you're dead on. I mean, we have a great force. We don't want to have any sort of implication or innuendo or whatever saying that there are any difficulties within that police force when it comes to topics like this. I think from Councillor Parrish's viewpoint, it's probably one of the most regrettable things she's ever said. Many of you know that her father was a police officer, and that's what even makes it probably more difficult for her. I'd like to get rid of this painful process. It's almost like an operation. If you're sick, you're ill, something's wrong, get it done, fix it. And I think that's why today we have to fix it. I'm going to make even a further suggestion that, and I'm not sure if the councillor will agree to it, but I think there should be probably a face-to-face with the deputy, and maybe even with the police association. And maybe, you know, sometimes in a forum like this, you don't get all the feelings and facts out. And I really think something like that, which is so important to all of us at the Region Appeal, so important to our police force. And I don't know if that's workable, but I personally, I mean, tried to put myself in the councillor's position to say, what would I do? This is what I would do, because I think we have to heal this whole process and make sure that we all understand that we have to correct it in the right fashion. And the difficult that is, I'm sure every one of us has a personal side opinion. We've probably all said something maybe off, you know, off limits, off topic, off something. But we've never got to the point where we've had to defend ourselves. And Councillor Parrish is probably one of the greatest fighters for her community, has probably done the most for her ward in 30 years. She's fought for everybody, no matter what their backgrounds, color, diversity, religion. She's done that. And I think when we see a small excerpt of her life, you know, there's got to be a better way. I think the penalties or whatever certainly are something that nobody has really discussed here, but I think that's something that should be done. But to me, it's a difficult process, it's a healing process, and I really think that that we should take a look at her case, but at the same time, to have this happen to a high-ranking police officer who's worked through the process for over 30 years in her own right, and from everything I hear, has done a wonderful job. We as councillors have to defend that person too, and we depend on our police force. They depend on us to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Councillor Parrish and colleagues, it's been a difficult process, troubling, unfortunate. I know that Councillor Parrish concedes that her comments were hurtful, they were intemperate, and completely inappropriate, no matter what circumstance. And she knows that, and we heard that in her voice today. She apologized unequivocally. She regrets. She is truly sorry. And I will defend her too by saying that she has been a very dedicated councillor. Her work has been exemplary. She cares deeply about the community, and what she's done there has been transformative. And I know those comments are not who she is, because I know how passionate she is. However, on the other side of this, our workplaces must be kept respectful, free of discrimination and harassment, and we as elected officials have that responsibility to be held to the highest moral and ethical standard possible. And to argue somehow the rules or the process, I think, is just wrong-headed here. Things were said that shouldn't have been said, and the councillor has conceded and agreed with that. We all have been the greatest advocates for greater diversity, inclusiveness in our city, and accepting everyone. Our council has embraced that, and we've worked positively to ensure that our institutions are reflective of the communities we serve, including the police force, and the chief has done a wonderful job in trying to broaden the diversity on the force. Councillor McFadden, on her part, is co-chair of DIAC, our Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and she's chair of the Police Services Board. So in that context, I can see when receiving these comments, she felt obliged in her capacity to bring that forward. Now, to the chief, I have full confidence in your hiring practices that are all based on merit, and that Deputy Berkeley-Brown is more than ever more deserving of this well-earned promotion. And I congratulate her on achieving it. I have come to know her in the community and admire her greatly. As I mentioned last meeting, she smoked me in the last race, but that's okay. She's been a veteran of the force for 32 years. She's highly educated and worked in several areas across the force: uniform patrol, community services, and race and ethnic relations bureau. She's really demonstrated her commitment to bettering our community. She volunteers with various organizations, including Peel Multicultural and the Congress of Black Women. In fact, I saw her recently at the scholarship breakfast that I attended as well. So Councillor Parrish, I know, regrets these comments. And as I said, it's not the person that I know. She's a champion for the community, and it was a lapse. So I would like personally to volunteer, as maybe all of us should, to take the sensitivity training. I think we could all elevate ourselves and learn something. We will all learn something. It is important given the cities, the communities that we live in. We could all do better. Not one of us has sent an email or a text that maybe we have regretted and could have thought twice about. Maybe we should have slept on it before we sent something. And I know that Councillor Parrish regrets it. I understand the position that Councillor McFadden was placed in, given the responsibility that's been bestowed on her. I think we all agree the comment was inappropriate and wrong. But she's sorry. So if council decides, and notwithstanding if you decide or not, I hope we all take the sensitivity training, and I hope that we do it voluntarily, because I think there's something that we can all learn and we can all do better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Yes, thank you. To the Integrity Commissioner, I in no way was knocking you, sir. What I was saying is that I think the job you did was done with the information you had on hand. So I'm not knocking your report. I was just simply stating that I felt that there should have been more information available. Having said that, I would like to, as the seconder of the motion, ask for a recorded vote on that, please. Yeah.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Wow, what a way to end a term, really. The uncomfortable conversation around the table, I don't think is anything that we would wish on anyone. I want to address the comments of Adrian Woolley and acknowledge the work that the Police Association does in terms of coaching and mentoring young officers that come into the force. I can't disagree with the comments that you made this morning in terms of, you know, the message that in isolation of all of the information, those young officers, regardless of what their background might be and what they bring to the table, you know, it's difficult in a community to attract and retain good officers who are passionate about the job, and you know, the kind of conversation we're having here today doesn't make that any easier. And I want to acknowledge that very much so, and to express appreciation for the work that you do as an association. I do have to say, though, I do think that the Police Services Board could have handled this differently, and Councillor McFadden, as your role there, I understand that you felt that action needed to be taken. I do think that there was a way that allowed for an exemplary officer to not have her integrity called into question in such a public way. I agree with Councillor Sato on that. I think that a lot of people through this have had their dignity tarnished in a way that was, in my view, completely unnecessary. I am incredibly troubled by the fact that we don't have the privilege of the entire text. I know you think that that's not important, but I think it's vitally important. If I wrote a note about something and threw it in the garbage can and somebody pulled it out and said, "Did you write this?" and I said, "Yes," in the isolation of knowing what the note that I maybe passed to somebody was all about, you could build a story around it. And I'm not excusing the comment that was made in any way, shape, or form. But there's a story built around the text for which we have not got the benefit of understanding the back and forth of the text message. I think that's unfortunate, and I don't think it serves anybody well, and it certainly does not serve the Deputy Chief, the newly appointed Deputy Chief, well. So I am incredibly troubled by that. When I read the report from Principal's Integrity, you know, it sounds logical and reasonable moving forward. There are some questions that were raised in my mind. When I read the response from the lawyer that Councillor Parrish had retained, to be honest, I read it and thought that they shot a lot of holes in the report that you put before us. That's my own perception of that. But I hate to see the good, all of the good that Councillor Parrish has contributed to public life. And trust me, Councillor Parrish and I have had our differences over the years, many of them. And, you know, well, I'd hate to see the text messages that went back and forth between her and I on that, perhaps. And I don't mean to make light of it, but, you know, there were times when, you know, Councillor Parrish and I don't always agree. Many times, in fact, mostly don't agree with some of the colorful language and colorful approach that she takes to many issues. But she has contributed enormous good to the Region of Peel and the residents who call the Region of Peel. And I think it's really sad that this one incident that, in my opinion, should have and could have been handled in a much more dignified way, somehow all the good evaporates through the conversation that we're having here today. I think it's really unfortunate. There is no right answer. There is no right recorded vote. There is no right vote on this. It was made, the comment was made, it was acknowledged, it was owned, it was apologized for in the most sincere way. And I do agree with Councillor Starr. It's time for the healing to begin. And I know that Councillor Parrish is one of the first ones that when she screws up, tries to make it right. And I know that she will start the healing process and have that candid and sincere conversation that needs to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report, Janice. And I think we've all been a little uncomfortable this morning. It's been acknowledged, and I'm sure we've all sent our fair share of texts in the past that if it landed on the front page of the newspaper, none of us would be proud. I recognize that. I guess the issue we face is when we brought in both the lobbyist registry and brought integrity commissioners on board, their role is to look at things, our conduct, in a fair and unbiased opinion, or in a fair and unbiased way. So that being said, I appreciate Councillor Parrish's apology this morning. I think it was truly genuine. But I also think that this report will make us think twice about how we treat others, both our residents and fellow councillors, elevate ourselves the way that our residents expect us, which is to set an example and to not move forward with the recommendations. And I do believe that the admonishment is nominal, and I would agree that we should all take that sensitivity training. I think that's unfair to what happened to Deputy Berkeley-Brown. I think we need to show our appreciation for the police services that provide safety within our communities, and we need to rebuild those bridges. So that's why I say we move forward with this. I know there are people who question the process. At the end of the day, this isn't about process. It was said, it was acknowledged, we need to move forward in a constructive way, but in a way that we reaffirm our support for police services and the diversity, and recognize the diversity within our entire region. So that I'm happy to second the motion that Councillor Miles puts forward, and we need to move along. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Probably toughest thing for me to talk about, in that no amount of humor is going to fix this, and 35 years of knowing someone and being pretty much her best friend probably makes me somewhat subjective in my comments, but I'll try to keep it as straight on the agenda as possible. I was present when every material thing happened in this particular case, and really, without getting into retrying it, so to speak, or relitigating it, there's good parts of me that are quite upset at what came out and what didn't come out. And I certainly appreciate Councillor Parrish's heartfelt apology. When you know someone for so many years, you know, you can see fundamentally Carolyn might have a couple character flaws. One is anger management, which may be the course she should be sent on. And secondly, extreme passion for her community that she loves. She went through a very hard, and I'm not excusing her, but just a little picture of what happened. Very hard process with that police station of hers. And I don't want to get into too many details. Was very unhappy with everything that happened in that process, and was not a great outcome for her. And I didn't happen to be present when the text got sent. I saved her many times from other ones, but this one I wasn't present for, so I would have stopped it if I could have, but it wasn't possible. I am privileged to knowing what was in the rest of those texts, and I don't want to discuss it because at this point it's hearsay. But I do think you can draw a negative inference, as the legal people would say, from the fact that someone was so careful to hand in certain screenshots, but was equally careful to make sure the other ones disappeared. So for this, it's nothing to do with the complaint at all, which is, of course, inexcusable comments about Deputy Chief, but that part of the process sticks in my craw, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't at least mention that. But be that as it may, the committee, the integrity commissioners had their findings, and which are, materially correct, and have found Councillor Parrish in violation of those parts of our operating procedure. But before, if you want to really know what humiliation feels like, you should have spent the last 90 days with Councillor Parrish. She was very regretful throughout the whole process and couldn't believe that she was stupid enough to make those comments. I don't think I've ever seen Carolyn so, honest to God, I got tired of hearing her apologize about her behavior. I hadn't, it just, I know what I'd say if I didn't want to get the next complaint against me. It was something up, and she recognized that right from the get-go. I said, well, you're going to have to take your lumps, because in today's world, what you said doesn't get a pass. It's tough medicine you're going to have to take. But it is, I think Councillor Nando said, a teachable moment, and then we have to move on to reconciliation. The constant torture, a lot of people take a fair amount of pride in Carolyn's work, and to set her off for the summer holidays with a big cloud hanging over her wouldn't be fair either. I think it's very appropriate to receive the report and, in fact, endorse its findings. But however, the additional humiliation of finding something $1,000 or a week's pay and have to go to class. I mean, Carolyn could teach that class on diversity. Really, it's kind of a tragic part. That's just true. And just before we vote on this, or we have another speaker, I think it would behoove everyone if you just heard for a moment just a short list of the humanitarian work that Councillor Parrish has done, both as an MP and as a councillor and a school trustee. And starting with her early career, she put an end to corporal punishment in Peel schools back when they said spare the rod and spoil the child. And that barbaric practice ended, and with many thanks from the principals of the day who said that they hated giving the kids this trap. She negotiated with the Human Rights Commission to allow the Sikh students to wear their kirpans to school, despite the Peel board having voted it down. She actually went to the hearing and said, notwithstanding that the Peel board doesn't support me as the chairman of the board in this, we can come up with some kind of compromise. And the Human Rights Chair of the day, Dr. Plout, agreed with her, and they came up with a formula that the Sikh students could wear the kirpan to school. And to the best of my knowledge, that's been 100% success for the last 30 years. And very importantly, she introduced the idea of benefits, health benefits for gay and lesbian employees and their partners at the Peel board when the prevailing objection was that we can't give gay people their benefits because they'll just drag their friends down to the dentist and say that's my partner, which was sadly a prevailing view at the time. Fortunately, I'm not aware of anybody doing that, and it's been, again, some 30 years since that went through. In her career, she's raised $3 million for humanitarian causes like the Cancer Society, a ban on landmines, which are reprehensible, and recently over $1 million for the Milk Fund in Peel to help sponsor the kids to get a decent breakfast and lunch. She's sponsored children in developing countries, promoted equity by supporting dental health for seniors, and is a big supporter of Habitat for Humanity to help with the housing. So, and little things like affordable bus fares for seniors, for goodness sake. So, I know I leave it with you to determine where the punishment ends and where reconciliation begins, but I guess the greatest thing that we could do to get through this would be to accept an admonishment, which I know Carolyn does, and put her back to work where she belongs to continue her great contribution to the region of Peel and to her ward and Ward 5. I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis.
Thank you. I don't think anyone around this table is second-guessing Councillor Parrish's sincerity in her apology or her life's work of giving back to the community by any means. But there has been a great talk about moving forward and starting the healing process. And I personally cannot support just receiving the recommendation after we've heard from our own Police Services Association that says that they support the full recommendation. I think in order to start the healing process, accountability is part of it, but we all too, sitting around this table, have to take accountability for that decision that we're making. Are we supporting the report and its full recommendations as being requested, not only by our integrity commissioners, but as well as our police services, so that we can then start the healing process? I think that's the question that we're all going to be answering. So I can't support just supporting the receipt. Councillor Parrish knows that what she said was wrong. She's fully admitted it. She's apologized for it. I think that we're all willing to move forward and work together. You know, we pride ourselves on being a very inclusive and diverse region. In fact, probably the most diverse and inclusive region throughout this entire country. So I think that moving forward, we have to start the healing process, but that can only begin when we've finished the process and took a very clear, loud stance as councillors that those words are not acceptable. Whether they've apologized or not, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we got to where we are, the words are not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Switch it back and forth. Councillor Shaughnessy.
Okay. Emotional times. I do not see, Councillor Innes, how a penalty means that you're going to heal. To say that you can only start healing once there's been a penalty doesn't make sense to me. If every time any one of us had handed over a text or said or informed somebody else about terrible things that another councillor had said on another councillor, and on and on and on. I mean, I'm talking about throwing the first stone. I mean, we cannot, we will all agree that what was put in that quick text was not who Carolyn Parrish is or anybody that we want anybody to be. It was totally, from my perspective, handled inappropriately. There should have been some sort of a communication, some sort of a meeting of the people to actually go forward. I've seen a lot in the 4 years, but what I've seen is councillor on councillor. That's unacceptable. In my own place at the town of Caledon and at the region of Peel. It's unfortunate. But what I'm truly worried about is democracy, because what we don't want is to create a council that becomes nothing more than a bureaucracy where everybody's afraid to advocate. And passion comes with its risks, there's no doubt. But for people, are we going to create a system where councillors are afraid to step up because somebody might construe what they said? I know there's no misconstruing on what Councillor Parrish said. It was in a text. But we have to put it in perspective. In perspective, it was a personal device sent to one individual. It was not a public statement. If it had been a public statement, I might have been looking at it from a different perspective, but it wasn't. So I have to say why. So all of us can look back at 4 years and point out something that we could have done better, that had it been made public, we wouldn't have been happy with. But we've dealt with this. A penalty doesn't mean now we can move on. Because if you listen in the criminal system, where people think because they go to jail that all of a sudden the healing process starts, no, that has nothing to do with the healing process. The healing process starts with acknowledging the issue and moving on. It does not lessen what happened. It's too bad that it wasn't handled in a better way. It could have been. But I totally disagree, and that's why I put my light on, is that you have to throw a penalty in order to start to heal? Absolutely not. You have to acknowledge the issue, the problem, and then you can start to heal. The penalty does not start that process. Thank you.
Councillor Spovieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I know why I get along with my neighbor here. We think alike. Along the same lines, Mr. Chairman, criminals are put in jail to hopefully rehabilitate them and put them back in society and be productive. A lot of them do get rehabilitated. A lot of them actually get worse. They come out and they're worse. Sometimes the penalty does not really achieve the goal. In my judgment, given Councillor Parrish this mediocre penalty, I don't know whether it's just the penalty that's been recommended is to me it's not it's a black mark on the character of person if it's given. But I don't believe it, as we heard from Councillor Cullerson, I don't believe Councillor Parrish is a bad person and deserves to be penalized. I don't believe that this penalty will make her to rehabilitate her. I believe that she's already an outstanding human being, and all the work that she's done and for her community. So giving her this penalty, I understand why penalties are given. And they basically teach people a lesson and to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I'm sure Councillor Parrish has learned her lesson, and she knows she made it was a wrong thing to say, and I think we've all learned from this. I don't believe it. We've had we actually at council, because of what happened at Brampton, we did have a sensitivity training session, and was it useful? Well, I think that this experience, we talking about it, is a lot more useful and a lot more productive than actually 2 hours of rambling that I can't remember a word that was said. I got the gist of it, and but I think we've all learned from this experience here that what's right and what should be said and what shouldn't be said, and to control our tempers and to be more diplomatic as politicians and so on. So I have to say that, given her, I'm sure it's not going to hurt her pocketbook to give her this few days of penalty, but I don't believe that that's going to achieve. It's going to be really achieve any. It's not going to make it better. Let's put it that way. I don't believe it's going to make her a better person. She's already a good person. She's already a better person. So just giving her this penalty is not going to make it any better. So I don't believe it. I think, as I said before, we all deserve a second chance and move on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Miles.
Could you call the question, Mr. Chairman, please?
He's switched.
He's allowed to speak if he hasn't.
Okay, then. I have to call the vote then to call the question.
Okay.
All those in favor? Call them a question. No, this took, yeah. Okay, and the motion is one of receipt. It was moved by Councillor Sato, I believe, and seconded by Councillor Cook, and a recorded vote was requested.
point, which it can't be, no, it's not a tie because Councillor Parrish actually didn't vote. But she pushed the button. Can we clear it and start over? Just clear it and start over. That's easier.
The motion's defeated. So the second motion then was the recommendation of the Integrity Commissioner. I don't know, if you want to put that up, or does everybody take it as read, or do you want it up? I don't. Okay. So that's the recommendations from the Integrity Commission, which is, I can read them, that the remuneration paid to Carolyn Parrish as a member of Peel Regional Council be suspended for a period of 5 days, and that the Peel Regional Council engage a qualified person to provide sensitivity training to Councillor Parrish, and at their option, other members of Peel Regional Council, which training at minimum includes the subjects of sex and race-based biases. Says at their option.
Another member, so.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Jeffrey? Okay. Recorded vote is required.
Oops.
The motion passes. Councillor, or Mayor Thompson, would you move receipt of 16-2? That was Councillor Parrish's vote, and second by Councillor Cook. All in favor? That's receipt of the response from Carolyn Parrish's solicitor. All in favor? Carried. I don't know if there's going to be, are we going to go into cameras or questions on the income? No, I know, but before we go into the notice, are we going to, is there any questions on any of the in camera? No, I'm not there yet. I'm just, the only reason I'm asking, otherwise we'll go for lunch.